Let's begin. We are about to begin our webinar. Welcome to the PIDE webinar, our fourth webinar on aid. Can you see the screen? Hello?
No, sir. Please share it again, sir.
Share it again. Okay, lovely. I'll do it again. There's something wrong. Share screen. Am I getting it wrong? Can we see it now? जी मंसूर साहब अब देख screen
जी सर नजर आ रही है सर.
Okay, folks, welcome to the PIDE webinar. This is the fourth in our series of foreign aid. As many of you know, we are trying our best to understand all subjects related to Pakistan. We are trying to expand our conversation. I think we have been too timid in trying to understand the economy, so we are taking charge at the PIDE and trying to extend our conversation, so we don't have one webinar anymore, we have a number of webinars. So in this webinar, please, as usual, mute your mics, let the speaker speak, and you will inshallah have a chance to voice your thoughts later. In this webinar, I'm especially grateful to Hina Rabbani Khar, who is one of our most capable young politicians. I don't think there's anybody in Pakistan doesn't know her. She has been both the Minister for Economic Affairs as well as the Foreign Minister. Today, we are going to ask her to talk to us in a capacity as the former Minister for Economic Affairs. So welcome, Minister. Well, we are going to speak to Hina Rabbani Khar, who, as I said, is even now she's a current MNA, and I must compliment her for taking her time out to join us. And with that, I will also lament, as my usual lament, that politicians and bureaucrats refuse to join in a conversation with us. So when people say a conversation, I feel a little concerned as to why the conversation is one-sided. But Madam Minister, we are very grateful to you for joining us and answering our questions. I'm sure we learn a lot from you. We have had 3 webinars before you, Madam. We deliberately try and hold academic webinars before we invite personalities like yourself to come and join us. We will tell you about those webinars. We will tell you we've had speakers who have done their dissertations on aid. We have had a lady from Oxford, Masouda Bano, a professor who's done a book on aid. So we have tried to inform ourselves for the subject before approaching you. We'll get to that. But let me quickly point out why we do this. Our long-term growth rate, Minister, is coming down. We have had a volatile growth path, and this is something that every citizen in Pakistan should be concerned about. A declining growth path in the face of a very young, rising population is a cocktail for disaster. But there it is. Related to this is the issue of our investment rate. Our investment rate seems to be declining even as it is very low. We are almost down to 12 or 13% of investment, which is like replacement rate, which means we are really not investing in our society. The story begins, we've been doing a lot of webinars, etc., to learn about the economy. And we have found out that the failing in the economy is not that we don't have money. It's that we don't have policy. It's that we have policy inconsistency. It's that we've got poor policy development. It's that we are chasing taxes like the Sheriff of Nottingham was chasing taxes. And those who are familiar with the history, Nottingham didn't grow, Nottingham declined. The transactions costs are huge in our economy. We have no human resource management. We are throwing our best people out of the country. We tell them to leave the country. We have no markets. We are overregulated everywhere. We've just done a paper on the footprint of the government, and it turns out to be 70 or 80%, which is huge. Energy remains a governance problem, which despite 4 or 5 government changes, we still haven't solved. Energy is a problem of the ministry trying to run energy from its back pocket. No energy system can be run from the back pocket of any ministry, whether the secretary or the minister, whoever. Our cities are just not capable of investment. So there are a number of things. Now let's come to the subject, Minister. What we've seen is that we are so aid dependent that we can call ourselves unindependent, that we are not independent. All these things that you see before you, the unbundling of WAPTA, the NEPRA Act, the CCP Act, the TARP, the CSR Civil Service Reform of the 2005-6, Public Finance Management Law that has recently been written, SAPs and NGOs, the mortgage law, the Exim Bank, Everything has been written or done by the donors. The Pakistan Institute of Corporate Governance set up by the donors. I wonder, do the parliamentarians even read these laws? Does EAD even know that the donors are doing this? So that's a point of departure that I'd like you to take into account. This is something that we show every webinar. This is the slide of IMF programs. There hasn't been a decade in our history where we haven't had an IMF program. Now, full disclosure, I used to be a member of the IMF, but I reserve the right to criticize the fact that we are permanently in the emergency ward and that we have shown this deep inability to think our way out of the IMF. That is like huge incapacity. So here is a cartoon from the newspapers that sums it up beautifully. The fat man of the IMF in the chariot, running our government, which is running helter-skelter in a crisis mode. Madam, you were in the government, you know, we are always in a crisis mode. And the loans are dangling in front of us, and we don't even see the craggy landscape, we are running over it. So there is a huge problem. But then, this is a recent cartoon, but look at the old cartoon from 1950. Our forefathers understood. There's Liaquat Ali on crutches, dollar crutches, mind you. And there are two bankers standing there and saying, keep them on the dole, keep them on the dole. They'll remain where they are. And sure enough, they have been proven correct, we haven't. So our questions to you to begin with are very simple. What is this extensive role of aid? Madam, you managed the donors for a while. Is this the new paternalism? Is this a new colonialism? What is happening? I can tell you from our side, they're killing our universities because quite frankly, they do all the work for the government, we do nothing. Our talent is running away to them all the time and I don't know how it's utilized. Our thought industry is dead because their firms like Chemonics, Adam Smith International, Oxford Policy Management, etc., run our government. And they're not the best out there. So what do we learn? And they also are so arrogant, they don't show up at our webinars. I wonder if there are any donors here today. I'd be surprised if there are, right? So I want to ask you, madam, is aid helping us? The Missy Mayo wrote a very good book.
No, you.
Okay. And I want to leave you with this picture, madam, so you can answer. A begging bowl picture. Please, go ahead. Floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for putting some of the details over there, because I think it's very important to have an informed discussion. Not that this needs to be very informed, because I think over here, things are quite black and white, you know, when it comes to whether donor assistance, donor money has been useful for Pakistan's purposes or not. I think the answer is an overwhelming no. And the reason for that is that the recipient country, Pakistan being one of them, has little or no control on the quality. You know, you may want higher quantity, but on the quality of assistance that comes. And as you know, Nadeem, very, very well, you know, donor assistance, we like to call it donor assistance, this is a euphemism, right? But it's in all types of categories. There are some very expensive loans, there are some not so expensive loans, and there's some grant assistance. And we tend to believe that anything that is coming in grant assistance is free money and we must be able to utilize it, you know, according to whatever the donors want, and really not care because it's free money in any case. But what that does is that it actually eats into your governance mechanisms. The donor system becomes a parallel universe with which your own system has to survive. And because the donor system is always more well-fed and more efficient in some ways, efficient in being able to get the resources. So your system actually suffers. So instead of empowering the system, the donor money actually disempowers it and makes it less efficient, the system, as in the Pakistani government system. Now this is, you know, we can go in as much detail as you want, but let me give you the broad brush picture from what I have seen. As you know, for 7 years, I tried to work very hard on trying to get a bit of an aid assistance reform in Pakistan. And I have to say, whereas I'm very proud of the time I spent in the Foreign Office, because I do believe I was able to achieve much more. Here, I probably worked harder, but really have nothing to show for the work that I did. Because this entire aid architecture is, first of all, you know, governed by authorities which do not sit in Pakistan. Okay, so the congressman in the US, the parliament in the UK, the party in China, etc., will all determine where and how much aid goes into Pakistan. Now, it's a terrible place for any country to be an aid-dependent country. And I genuinely believe that in terms of money, we are not as aid-dependent as we are in terms of our mental dependence on aid. We are, of course, needing IMF assistance, because of our balance of payment crisis emerging every now and then, and some balance of payment support from the World Bank and ADB, again, to look at crisis modes. But all of this project assistance that comes into Pakistan has actually done more damage because it has always built parallel universes. And the biggest crying example of that is what has happened to the energy sector. I think our energy sector back in the 60s and 70s was a pretty decent one. I mean, people tell you stories about the World Bank people coming in, wanting to learn from our WAPTA people. And then you see where it is right now because they've been half-baked, half sort of understood reforms which have been fully owned but never really implemented. And what is even more tragic is that the governance failures within the bureaucracy of Pakistan becomes very, very magnified when it comes to how we take donor assistance. Now, let me give you an example. The executing agency is always an agency which is other than the Economic Affairs Division. The Economic Affairs Division happens to be, at the end of the day, just a post office type of an authority, which is there once it gets a request from the donors or from the executing agency, whether it's the health ministry or the education ministry or anyone, it just conveys those requests. And many a times, the finance ministry is so desperate for money that it will, frankly speaking, sign on to anything. Things that they know are virtually impossible to meet, any type of conditionalities. And there you have bound your countries to conditionalities or to a set of conditionalities that you know you're never going to meet. So what happens is that you have this huge exorbitant cost of money which has been allocated to Pakistan in the case of, for instance, Asian Development Bank and World Bank, which is never really utilized. So you incur that cost, and then of course the projects which are never really, fit into the fabric of society or the country or the ministry, and just go unattended most of the time, and the money is spent very, very inefficiently. So this entire system is at so many different levels, because at the global level, it's at the giver country level, it's at the recipient country level, and pretty much everybody, there are people and institutions within each of those places which are benefiting from this, broken system, which very, very petty benefits, right? And for the sake of those petty benefits, large losses will be incurred. I genuinely believe that donor money in Pakistan has damaged Pakistan's governance structure much more than any one of us realize. And as someone who tried to work on donor aid fragmentation and harmonization of aid very, very strictly, and taking on some very important countries, I can tell you they have no intention of changing this, and it's not likely to change. So as a recipient country, you have the choice to say thanks, but no thanks. Will Pakistan ever have the guts to do it? Grant assistance, for instance, which doesn't really make a difference to your budgetary, big ticket items. No, we will never have the ability to do it because too many people are blind.
That's a fascinating take. You said it up front that it's been negative for us, and I accept that. That's beautiful. Let me draw your attention to something that Vali Nasser quotes in his book. What is it called? The Dispensable Nation. He quotes your conversation with Holbrooke, which you might recall.
Yes.
Where he says that Holbrooke told you that he himself was aware of how the contractors took most of the money back and that the recipient government got little. We had a webinar with one young student who did a thesis in Australia, and he told us that of the Kerry Lugar money, roughly 75% was taken back. Now, does EAD know what's happening? Does EAD understand what the contractors are? Does EAD monitor the contractors? Or do the donors do whatever they like? Because the other book, for example, when we look at the 9/11 incident, there's talk of the donor money being used for nefarious purposes. So who's monitoring the donors?
Frankly speaking, no one. the right and the easy answer is no one, okay? Because there are gaps. So while EAD is the contracting agency or the signing authority, EAD has no clue as to what projects, execution, implementation, demand, supply is, right? So they will basically typically agree to anything that the donors are proposing, and the donors will go and negotiate that with the executing agency, which would be one of the ministries. The ministries feel that this is free money, even if it is loan money, by the way. They feel this is free money because it is coming other than their normal budgetary allocation, and they will sign into any very, very inefficient project that comes their way because they think this is, and they will get maybe a free trip abroad, right? And something as small and petty as that might be a determining feature in signing on to. And by the way, if I am to point out any inadequacies or not corrupt practices, but let's say what I would consider to be irresponsible behavior on part of our bureaucrats, it is magnified when it comes to the donors themselves. Because the donors, as I said, as someone who worked very hard on trying to harmonize it and trying to take care of the fragmented donor approach, have no intention of changing that because it benefits. You see, there's a whole economy running on it, Nadeem, and you know this better than having served at the IMF. There are these whole lot of second and third tier consultants roaming around in the world who will be unemployed if there were no donor money to be taken, right? So until and unless the country is to be very firm, a recipient country is to be very firm in stepping in and saying that, listen, we need assistance only for these things, and most of it we would want budgetary grant assistance or budgetary loan assistance. Other than that, why budgetary loan assistance or grant assistance? Because it feeds into projects which are prioritized by the government of Pakistan, by the people of Pakistan, by the Parliament of Pakistan, through the government system, right? Instead of making a simultaneous system. And other than that, all your projects, such as feeding girl children in Tata, which sounds very nice in Congress, but will only be a 3-month project. And what happens to the same girl children after your project runs its life, which is probably 3 months to 2 years, right? So there has to be sustainability in all of this. So until and unless the government really steps in and says that these are our terms, and you can only go according to these terms. Other than that, thanks, but we don't need your money. We try to do that in EAD. And we felt as much resistance from the donors as we did from our own line ministries, who were quite keen to get, as I said, any type of money. So this really needs to be changed at, I would say, when I say the top level, what I mean is all of government approach is required. And as you know, our bureaucratic system, the way our ministries run, is so broken. Literally, that's the only way to, that's the only word to use, because now sitting in PAC, having been out of Parliament for 5 years, I come across exactly the same issues, being going round and round in circles, begging the secretaries to do their DSCs, which they will not do, and will appear in front of PSCs without any homework. So this is a typical, warm bodying approach. It's until unless more changes and until unless government puts its foot down, do not expect the donor money to be a useful. I don't think any change is possible.
Okay, here let me bring in Fahim Jahangir, one of our young students who's done. Well, now young professional. Fahim has done a thesis on foreign aid, and he was the organizer of the last few discussions. Fahim, can you quickly give the minister a rundown of what we've learned so far so that she can respond to that? Fahim, unmute.
Can you hear me, sir?
Yeah, and quick, we don't want long things, okay? Fahim, where are you?
Okay, so yes, there is some issue. Yes, can you see the screen now?
We can see the screen, but go on. I've already shown.
So yeah, so this is the basically the GDP growth trend of Pakistan. Okay, so this is the history of IMF lending to Pakistan. This is the foreign economic assistance to Pakistan during the last decade. So if you see, China is the leading bilateral donor, and then the World Bank, ADB, and Islamic Development Bank are the leading multilateral donors. This is the USAID economic assistance to Pakistan. If you see there, then we have 3 peak periods when we were getting a lot of amount of aid in Pakistan during the Cold War period, then the Soviet Afghan period, and then after the post 9/11 period.
When you come to the webinars, ye chhod do. Come to the webinars. Or
Basically, this is from my webinar.
Aid industry dikhao. Theek hai, good.
Okay, so as the honorable speaker was mentioning about the large aid industry in Pakistan, so my thesis shows that there are a huge number of multilateral, bilateral donors, international NGOs, and then civil society organizations, and on the recipient end, there are ministries and divisions at the federal ministry level, and then at the provincial level. And apart from that, there are other number of actors involved in managing the aid industry. These include the bureaucracy, consultants, and think tanks, political groups, and things like that. We mapped the aid network in Pakistan. I came up with 9 groups of actors in the aid policy network in Pakistan, which include provincial government, bilateral donors, multilateral, external interest groups, domestic interest groups, and others so on. And then I have actually did the resource in dependency analysis and found that the World Bank, the politicians in power, and Ministry of Finance, they are the key actors managing the aid policy network in Pakistan. Again, the honorable speaker was talking about the aid fragmentation, multiplicity. So this is the graph which shows that donors' activities in Pakistan via government and private channels in 2018. So if you see that, then you will see that donors very much like
large number of donors and small projects. So let's stop here. Let's get the minister's response. Hina, what do you say? We've got so many actors. We are overwhelmed, and they are using very small amounts of money to control us. Are we independent? Go ahead.
Look, I won't say are we independent? Yes, we are independent if we choose to be independent. And I completely disagree with blaming the donors for the mess that is in Pakistan, because Pakistan has the option to say no. Do not forget that Pakistan has the option to say no. Pakistan should say no to all of this proliferation of small aid projects being distributed through contractors and agencies, and some non-governmental organizations are very good, and some are just literally made in office and feed on donor money, which, by the way, we all do know that the priorities are set not in Pakistan, but in their capitals abroad, right? Now, what is to say that Pakistan is even able to receive that type of, those projects are a priority for Pakistan in the first place? There might be a priority 10 years later, or could have been a priority 10 years back, but a country must have control over what is going inside it. What type of projects are being implemented? Who are the implementing agencies? If you have no control over it, you are in really messy water, because rather than sorting out things, the same proliferation of donors and donor projects, sometimes literally $100,000 each, will actually gnaw at your system. It will keep your education system from reforming, because a lot of people would believe that, oh, that one project happening in that one little corner of Pakistan is going to transform Pakistan. You get these wrong notions. Look, a lot of countries have had the capacity to say no, right? I genuinely believe, as I say repeatedly, as someone who worked on it and failed, I completely accept the fact that there was no way to manage, because all of these embassies and donors have interests which are really deep-rooted, okay? And while we love to talk about the wrongs that our bureaucrats do, many of these, this aid is distributed on people that the, embassy people know, meaning the small grants are pretty much go to, someone who has an NGO or not, etc. So you can take control if you're willing to take control, right? It's absolutely possible to take it. All of this proliferation is doing nothing for the poor of Pakistan. And I remember as a child looking towards the UN as if it was this God's gift to earth, and an agent and an entity which is going to give, which gives free health and free education. And you grow up and you are appointed Minister of State for Economic Affairs Division, and you find out, well, most of the money that UN spends on Pakistan is the money that Pakistan gives to the UN, right? And then maybe 10 to 15 to 30% of that is actually spent on the Pakistani poor. The rest of it, I would say close to 10%. I mean, there are different analyses on it, right? The rest of it goes to contractors abroad, to consultants abroad, some consultants in Pakistan, and lots of heavy cost of machinery, offices, cars, jeeps, establishment costs. Is this how you want to run this country? I would say an overwhelming no to that, right? That you say thank you, but no thanks. You have priorities. You want to go help, do charitable work. Please do it in a country, but not Pakistan, because Pakistan would like to do its own charitable work. And Pakistan has these options. For instance, in our time, we said, there's BIS, Benazir Income Support Program. You want to help the poor? This is the best vehicle to help the poor. Go and put. And by the way, you were referencing to that conversation with Richard Holbrooke. I remember how that conversation started, because Richard Holbrooke in the Friends of Development Pakistan, I think that's what it's called, yeah? You even forget what it's called. Friends of Development Pakistan Forum, which was in Istanbul, decided to tell all of us that, oh, Pakistan doesn't know what, and I later became a pretty good big fan of Richard Holbrooke, because he was able to deliver. He wouldn't make a promise, but once he made a promise, he was able to deliver on it. So he told us that we don't know what we want. And I told him clearly and categorically that Pakistan has categorically told you what they want. We want trade access and not assistance and aid. If you can give us trade access, please let us know. If you can't, then don't tell us we don't know what we want, okay? Now, they were unable to do it because of congressional control, and who had the Congress, who had the Senate, and all of those types of nice things. So we told them, okay, now if you can't do that, then we would like you to put the entire bundle of your money in a big transformational project, such as a big hydro project, okay? And they were trying to work on it, but some of the money we were able to get, I think $200 million to $500 million specifically for Benazir Income Support Program. Now that is what you want to do. You want to create your own programs and then tell the donors, this is your only option. Okay, these 4 or 5 are our flagship programs. This is the only option. You want to assist Pakistan, help the poor. This is the vehicle to go. Now, if you want to do your own little thing in trying to appease your conscience, please go do it in some other country. Leave us out of this, because this doesn't really translate to the poor of Pakistan.
Mm-hmm. But one question that I have is, when we have, for example, cars or toothpaste or bulbs, if China throws in, or any country for that matter, let me not take any specific example, any country throws in cheap bulbs that outcompete our industry and are shown to be below cost, WTOP defines it as dumping.
Yeah.
Now, would you agree with me that the Pakistani universities are competing with Chemonics and with Adam Smith International and with Oxford Policy, all these groups, these consulting groups, that really have no other job except to work for donors? They really don't compete in the marketplace. They don't work in the marketplace, but they have this. And they come with money. Their consultants come at $2,000 to $3,000 a day, and our university professors can't even command $100 a day. They are being discriminated against in their own country. Would you regard that as dumping? I mean, this is something that I went to the Competition Commission and I said, hey, this is dumping. Now, is that dumping, or would you disagree with that?
No, obviously, I would call it dumping if the quality of those bulbs is very good. Since the quality is even worse than our own, it's something even worse than dumping, I would say. You understand what I'm saying, right? Because because you see, EAT walls, the Ministry of Finance walls, the Ministry of Planning Commission walls are filled, and you know this, with donor consultancy projects to tell us how to reform Pakistan in the energy sector, in the health sector, in the education sector. Now, how much of that transformation has happened? And first of all, how informed have those studies been in the first place, right? My experience has been that if you were to tell me, you tell me one big, great consultant that you came across that really changed your mind as a minister, I, frankly speaking, can't even name one. If you tell me, name 5 bureaucrats, 5, Pakistani professors, I can name you 10. Okay, so what I'm saying is that because they are aware of the surroundings, right? They're not coming in and transporting their fancy ideas and transposing them on Pakistan or imposing them on Pakistan. It is actually worse to be paying, because Nadeem, there is one within the project cost of consultancies, right? And you also know that there's this whole, now I'm forgetting the nomenclature that we use for this, but it used to be called technical assistance or something, TAs, right? Technical assistance of $10 million. And where does all of that money go? Now, this is big money. For a country like Pakistan, this is all big money. And then there's also the commitment charges, as you may know, and you do know, I know, that for instance, if Pakistan were to commit to borrow $500 million of IDA money, which is World Bank money, concessional money, and then you, because that project never has a buy-in in your own ministries, and because the Ministry of Finance enforced it on the executing agencies, are never able to implement it, tons of ADB projects in the road structure, in the road facilities, in the energy sector are lying unattended, and Pakistan continues to not utilize the money and pay tens of millions of dollars in commitment charges. But do any one of us have the time to really look into it and raise that? Now, I know when I was at PIDE, that's why I think, you know, I'm very proud of calling this a failure, because I worked very hard. Okay, we would do weekly meetings with executing agencies to try and sort the mess out. But believe me, there's no sorting out the mess, because there's such deep-rooted interest, and because none of the parties involved are willing to or keen to. So it became almost a solo flight, right? And which you can never do. I mean, it has to be an all of government and all of, you know, it has to be a very, very serious group, at least, effort, which has to be, you also know the issues that continue to persist within the Ministry of Finance, debt management wing, and the EAD debt management wing, and your own planning, you know, where you used to work, planning commission. And everybody has a chunk of responsibility, and nobody is able to get the bigger picture. The only entity which could perhaps get the bigger picture is the Ministry of Finance, but who in the world in the Ministry of Finance has the time to? I mean, the Ministry of Finance is perhaps the worst run ministry I have ever had the experience to come across. It's like a black hole. You keep on putting in work and whatever else, but nothing will ever come out of it. So it's all structural, it's problematic, and I can say, and that's why I hate to waste my time on anything which I think cannot be done. And I agreed to this discussion because I think it's academic and informed. But my assessment is, until you take a policy decision at the country level, literally at the country level, at beyond even the by beyond the cabinet level, I mean, you take a firm decision, you actually take a legal course, right? And say that we are not, donors are only allowed to go through government agencies into government-owned projects. We are not here, our doors are not open for foreign consultants to come and tell us what to do. We will, you know, as ministries have projects which are approved. Okay, another interesting thing would be if we look at the percentage of ethnic approved projects which are actually donor sponsored. My assessment would be close to 75% would have one portion of donor assistance or the other, which is not a good thing, a portion. So it's not like they're financing 70% of your ethnic projects. It's just that they are unfortunately having a say which is bigger than the money that they're putting on the table.
Look, Karachi just happened, the floods, and immediately as Karachi happened, the World Bank turned up with a report that they had done in 2016. I looked at the report, and there were about 50 World Bank staff working on it. There were about 10 foreign consultants working on it. So a quick calculation, I may be wrong by a small margin, but by not. That report cost $5 million. Now, the World Bank has $5 million to spend. Shall I tell you what the budget of an average university in Pakistan is? Less than $5 million. So, I mean, how can we compete with that? But let me come to another question. Let's look at the response. I agree with you. The fault, dear Brutus, is in us and not in our stars or not in the donors. Yes, it's in us. But let me ask you a question. Now, when the Planning Commission prepares a plan, our system is Planning Commission has to prepare a plan.
Yeah.
That's a 5-year plan, and we must commit to the 5-year plan, and everybody must work in a coordinated manner. So in a sense, Planning Commission is a coordinated ministry, and we've kind of forgotten that. But I notice when the Planning Commission makes a plan, donors make what they call country partnership strategies, which are totally different from those plans, and they never feel the need to coordinate the two. Now, my question to you is, should EAD even exist, or should the Planning Commission be managing the donors so that the plans must be coordinated, and the donors should not have the ability to make their country assistance plans, which are like parallels to the plans of the government? Would you agree with that?
Okay, so Nadeem, over here, we are differing on our approach to the problem, right? Because you believe that it is and I know this has been your long stated position, that it is the presence of EAD which is making the donors make their country assistance strategy or country assistance plans. Let me allow me to completely disagree with you and say that you can turn the EAD upside down, you can turn the Planning Commission upside down, and you can turn the Finance Ministry, Q block, right and left. The donor country assistance strategy paper will continue to hold. Okay? Because this is how much in-depth, roots do these entities have in your country. They've been given a buy-in, they've been given space which is larger than the money they put on the table. And the money, to me, is largely useless because it creates more problems than the problems it solves, right? And obviously not all of it, okay? China, no matter what we say about it, has big transformational projects. You know, you have the motorways, the highways, some hydro project to show for it. It's not, now the other donors, the European donors typically want to appease their conscience and come up with these health and education strategy. But will it be their health strategy, education strategy, or will it be the government of Pakistan health and government strategy? So who has to put their foot down? The government of Pakistan. GOP in whole, not the EAD, not the Planning Commission, GOP in whole. And yes, I completely agree. I'm not going to say subsume the EAD or subsume the Planning Commission, but between these three ministries, not only two, but three, because you see the IMF is managed by Ministry of Finance, okay? And EAD, as I said, is more of a post office than anything else, because if there's a minister who's interested, they'll probably do these, coordination meetings and try and get some of the fragmentation away and look at how much execution is being done, etc., and how much commitment charges. If not, then nobody's looking, by the way. I mean, very few, and of course, the secretary, if he is, so eventually the reconfiguration of the civil services of Pakistan, and more importantly, the government of Pakistan and how it runs its business, how inefficiently, how poorly it runs its business, has to be the thing which needs to be looked at. So all of these, what we call economic ministries, there's perhaps room to subsume all of them into one, right? So that they're all working under one umbrella. And, but then even more importantly, you have to have the power or give someone the power to say no, because it shouldn't be that one door they knock says no, and then there are 10 other doors that they can knock, right? And I said, because as I said, because their interests within Pakistan, outside of Pakistan, or very, very petty interests of people who make money off the donor money. As I said, I'm not even talking about any corrupt practices over here. I'm just talking about regular benefiting from just excesses that come with the $5 million, as you mentioned. And I think it's not only unfair to the universities, it's also unfair to the bureaucrats. And you know that then we have this parallel system where the bureaucrats are also the executing, people for some projects, and on that they'll get a handsome salary, which is going to be 10 times their normal salary. So everybody wants to run and have a small office on the side. This all creates excesses, it creates inefficiency, it creates just very, very wrong economic incentives, and it creates incentives to do wrong. And this business has gone on for a long time, and my expressed view is it will continue to go on for as long as you and I live, simply for the reason that the interests are far too deep, and that no one in Pakistan will have the gut or will have the patience, because this type of work requires a lot of patience, a lot of serious work to actually say, and that, this type of proliferation of assistance and this small, minute assistance in this project and the other is not really useful for us. We can do without it.
Fair enough. I agree with you that we can't outpace globalization. We have to live with it. And yes, these agencies of globalization are going to carve out space from us, and we have to figure out how to handle it. Now, having said that, if I go back and look at the evaluations of donors, which I've looked at the World Bank evaluation, their own evaluations, not ours, their own evaluations. They have an evaluation department, and they do evaluations. The IMF does evaluations, the ADB does evaluations, USA, DFID, everybody has evaluation. They're available on the website. When I look at them, I find that they themselves recognize the shortcomings, except that the evaluation happens and it dies. But they are not transparent. They will not tell you, no matter what you do, I've tried to dig it out. They will not tell you 2 or 3 things. A, they will not tell you who their contractors were and what monies they got. For example, they will not tell you what Chemonics got. For example, Chemonics in Lahore is a project that I know of, which is $100 million. I bet in no ministry has $100 million in Pakistan. These guys have $100 million to spend. But in any case, so they're non-transparent in terms of the projects that they have financed and who their partners are. They're also non-transparent in another thing, how much money they lend to each other. For example, DFID gives a grant from our money to the UNDP and the World Bank. They've got grants across each other. So they're totally non-transparent. Now, my question to you is, yes, these practices exist. But now I come to you as an MNA. You, the Parliament, has the responsibility, the constitutional responsibility of money is yours. You are supposed to be the money custodians of the country. It's your job to see what happens to our money. It's your job to tell us how to tax us, etc., right? Why is there no parliamentary committee on aid? And why does Parliament not look at aid?
Okay, so this is the lovely part about Pakistan, right? Because you have the constitution and you have the rules of business, and they give responsibility to someone, and then you have how things are actually done, right? Parliament in this particular setup, has zero control over what laws even, not zero, I think that would be a mistake to say, but did you see how this finance bill went through Parliament? There is absolutely no interaction, there's no negotiation, there's no looking at what should be the priorities, what should not be. I happen to be in the finance committee, the Parliamentary Committee on Finance, and we've been screaming, shouting, not once has the advisor to Prime Minister on Finance showed up in that parliamentary committee. Not once. This is what the role of Parliament has been sidelined to in this, because nobody gives a, if I may use the word damn, because they think, they can happily do without it. The Prime Minister sets the precedence of not taking Parliament seriously. His ministers happily follow it. His members follow it even more. Most of the bills that have been passed in Parliament have been bulldozed. The ones have been bulldozed and be rejected by the Senate have had to be passed through the joint. I have never experienced as many joint sittings of Parliament as I have in this one, because each of those bills get rejected in the Senate and then they have to come back. So the interesting part about the budget making process itself is entirely flawed. And Fahim, you made that sort of interesting matrix, and in the middle you have the third player as the politician in power. The politician in power does what the finance ministry feeds him, period. You take any politician and you can change the names. You take them for the last 60 years, they will do as the Ministry of Finance feeds it. The Ministry of Finance has an exorbitant, overwhelming, absolutely bigger, larger than life, undeserved role in how this country runs, at least at the federal level. They don't deserve it, they don't take the responsibility for it, and they absolutely do not. They have an ability and a commitment never to apply their mind to anything that comes to the table. The rule is 50% off any project that comes. And look at your funding in PSTP. You'll have a proliferation of tens of thousands of projects, and where you need 30 billion, you will allocate 3 million, and you expect this country to run efficiently. You go and you announce projects worth tens of billions in Karachi, and actually more than your entire PSDP amount, right? And then recently, yesterday, I was hearing that there's some allocation of billions of rupees for a zoo in Islamabad. And I was wondering, where is this all notional money? So, our governance structure has become such that we continue to make these broad prioritizations. And I think in the beginning of your session, you mentioned that Pakistan, it's not really a problem of money. I agree with you. And you said that it's a problem of policy, I believe, right? And I would go even a step further and say it's a problem of prioritization, because you make at least something should be your priority, right? Let's deliver every 5 years a big win to Pakistan. You cannot do that until you prioritize in a resource-starved country. So if, for instance, you were to ask me what is the priority of this government, I would say, I honestly don't know. You were to ask me what was the priority of Pakistan People's Party government, I can tell you. This was a major, we did not compromise on that. That was a major. And, what we consider to be rightening, fixing many, many wrongs. PMLN government, maybe you can say roads, and our priority was irrigation systems. So there's certain areas. If you ask me what is this government's priority, I honestly don't know, because everything and nothing seems to, when everything is a priority, then nothing is a priority. So really, I genuinely believe the donors don't have it as easy in any other country as they have it in Pakistan, because of our broken systems. And we are I think the role of the Ministry of Finance has a huge role to play in how the system continues to be broken, because everything is, basically put at their door, and their door is too busy and people, I guess, not interested in fixing them.
Well, I take your point that Parliament is unnecessary, and I take your point that the budget process is broken, etc. But look, it was the politicians who broke the budget process through the 14th Amendment. 14th Amendment was a huge problem when you forced everybody to vote according to party lines, and fortunately, 14th Amendment really killed that. But so that you can respond to. Do you want to respond to that? Didn't the 14th Amendment?
Well, I do want to respond to it because you and I never agree on the politics of things, right? And the deal is that it's not the 14th. It's not about us not voting against according to our conscience. I mean, those of us who do read the documents, and this time I found out the Ministry of Finance had itself not read the documents. How is that for you? We had documents. We had the pink book, which had pages. 20% of the pages were empty. 20% of the ministry, they had not even told us what the allocation was for this year or the previous year. Now tell me, how do you as a parliamentarian deal with these large information gaps and miscommunication, misrepresentation, and really being mistold on the floor of the House? How do you fix the system? Not by having the ability to vote according to my conscience, but really about ensuring that you are able to empower the parliamentary system. And the parliamentary system is empowered through the committee system. I'm telling you the state of the committee system. This committee system, the minister has not bothered to come even once. I have walked out of meetings, and now I've realized there's no need to walk out of meetings because this is the way it is. Now I've stopped attending them half the time because it's completely a useless exercise. Now the Public Accounts Committee meetings, which are so important, where every principal accounting officer has to be here, we find out that every time even those that come, that do show up, have little or no information about the briefs that are in front of us. Okay, so everybody's attending meetings in the Prime Minister House, in the Parliament, here, then, everywhere. Nobody's doing their job. They're just busy attending meetings, and you have experienced government. You know what I'm talking about. Nobody has the time to really sit and make policy and implement policy. So, God forbid if we ever have to,
Let me bring in somebody from the floor. We've got Sultan Mahmood from Paris, a co-author of Piketty. So let's see what Sultan Saab has to say. Sultan Saab, go ahead.
Hi. Hi. Thanks a lot for allowing me to speak. No, it's a fascinating discussion. I just wanted to, as a researcher who looks at this, not really from the most beneficial perspective for Pakistan or any other country, but who just wants to understand the foreign aid process. I often really struggle in not knowing anything about foreign aid in Pakistan, especially the non-project based aid. So yes, you have talked about a lot of project based aid of the World Bank, but I'm thinking, for example, when India used to get aid, what we look is that we know how much was spent in which district on what. And in Pakistan, for example, where is the money going? So what we have to rely on is some time series analysis of over time, aid is increasing, and over time, GDP is increasing or decreasing, and we really don't know how much aid is spent in a particular region, whether we want to see. And even if, for example, we can look at a lot of things, but yeah, so could you maybe just clarify
data availability and
where does the coalition support fund go? What is the process like when it is transferred to the Ministry of Finance, and then where does it go? How is it allocated? Just to understand the process.
So the processes are very different. Why we are more concerned about the projectized assistance is simply because it is not budgeted within the Pakistani priorities of, so when, how Nadeem said, when the Parliament makes the budget and you put on all of these projects that you want to be financed per ministry, this is mostly outside of that. Okay, this is according to allocations which the donors want to make according to priorities, which are set in their capitals, whether it happens to be London, Brussels, DC, Beijing, wherever. Beijing not so much. In Beijing, no, because Beijing does work with us. Now, what you are referring to is probably budgetary assistance, right? Now, that is for a country. It should be. I'm proposing, and I did, work very hard to try and make sure that all assistance that comes into Pakistan comes through budgetary assistance, which means that the Parliament of Pakistan, the people of Pakistan, the country of Pakistan, the ministries of Pakistan set their priorities and say, these are the projects that we want to be financed this particular year over the next 5 years. And then if you as a donor want to assist us in education, you pick one of those projects to put in your money. right? So for instance, basic income support program is a very, very good example of this. Government said it's its responsibility to ensure that the poorest of the poor are taken care of by the state. This is our welfare program. Now donors come, this is the only place you can park your money, right? So that then you will be able to see through allocations which are made under the BIS head, okay? Now there should be in the Ministry of EAD records, which are also public, probably in the economic survey. I am able to find those things because I've been looking at it, long enough. You can find which donor, or perhaps not the bilateral donors, but at least the ADB, this should be public information, the Asian Development Bank and the World Bank, as to which budgetary programs have they financed or assisted us with. A lot of these very small donor countries, which are coming in within the aid of $10 million per annum, $5 million per annum, just use it to gratify and to give favors and to appease their conscience, okay? I think it has zero impact. That paltry money, altogether, it doesn't even come to $150 million. They create a lot of noise, a lot of sound, a lot of fury, a lot of, fragmentation, a lot of just having to do unnecessary, ridiculous meetings. So I genuinely believe that there should be an absolute end to it. I tried to in my capacity as minister and I failed because, because there's always this thing, why do you want to leave charity? Bhai, grant assistance, it's free money, take it. No, I would take it if it's free money, if it's going to the poor of Pakistan, right? But if it's filling in consultancies and, filling in fancy offices in Islamabad, blue area, that's not what assistance. Why should I, take the burden? Because there is a burden of assistance. Now, Pakistan, typically we keep on talking about foreign independent country, Pakistan is a beggar, Pakistan beggar bowl in hand, etc. Now, IMF though becomes your majburi. And Nadeem, I think the biggest problem, because what you talked to, so I think I've answered your question, and I just want to say, because what you talked about, why is it, I genuinely believe we need to ask ourselves the question that why is it that Pakistan is unable to get out of the fold of IMF programs? And why is it that every IMF program that we get into gets us right back there within a year? Literally, I mean, the last 2 decades, it's not been more than 2 years, even a year and a half. And the reason for that is that even IMF programs, and I know you've been, you worked at the fund, are in some ways policies that then never apply to the board of director countries. Who in the US applied what they applied to Pakistan in terms of frugality and, everything else? In the UK, when coronavirus, when COVID-19 hit, did they apply the same criterion? No, none of them apply the same, because these are not criterions which lead to growth and activity. And then, of course, in Pakistan, there's a very big problem of over-regulation that you mentioned right in the beginning, right? Because as someone who runs a very, very small business, reasonably small business, we have to go through 25 government agencies, some at the Punjab level, some at the federal level. And what do we get back from those agencies? Not even proper power, not even proper energy, not even water. You have to take care of all of that as a business in Pakistan, all your needs yourself, and keep on feeding the agencies on, various counts. So now none of this is rocket science. And you would have even more experience than I do, but I'm also fed up of listening to the same solutions for the last 15 years of my life. It's not about the solutions which more fancy World Bank documents will give you. It's about implementing them, and that has to be implemented in-house. One ministry, whichever ministry chooses to fix itself, it can. We fixed a lot of things in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, on the other hand. Okay, we had whatever gaps we had, we were able to fill in international law expert, in media expert, and because it's a bit of a standalone, it doesn't really come. So in the same way, if you have leadership, you can fill in the gaps to a very, very large extent, but it has to be done in-house. No consultant, no matter how fancy a report they write, will be able to do it for you.
No, I take your point, and quite frankly, we did 2 webinars with ex-staff, fund staff members, one with Masood Ahmed, the other with Adnan Mazrai, who used to lead missions to Pakistan. And we had very, very good extended conversations with them, and both of them admitted that there were program design flaws as well as Pakistani ownership flaws. And quite frankly, unless you think for yourself, you can't own anything. If you want to do anything in the world, whether you want to run a business, play tennis, play, hockey or whatever, you have to own the game and you have to work hard at it. We don't want to do that. But let me come to Ali Salman. He's the director of the Prime Institute, just returned from Malaysia with some fresh experience from Malaysia. Ali, go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Nadeem, and thank you, Hina Rabbani. It's, I think, a very informative presentation from our experienced politician and parliamentarian. It's, I think, one of the occasions she said that donors' influence has damaged the governance structure. So this is probably where you and it's like broader agreement here. But just wanted to request a clarification. And Hina Rabbani, you also said that it's a, you would rather want all the aid to flow through the government, through the parliament oversight, through the budgetary support system, rather than otherwise. So my question is your criticism is more on the channel of the aid, and you're thinking that maybe the aid coming through, let's say, through the civil society and NGOs has done more damage, or you are taking a principled position against the aid as such. So I appreciate the clarification from your side. And also, while I'm here, if there is like an aid reform, let's say, policy, what will be the 2 or 3 main messages which you'd like to share with this audience? Thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to start from the middle question, come to your last question, and go back to your first question, because so I don't forget. So the middle question was, do I have a problem if I'm saying that it should come through government channels? Do you have a problem with the quality? I have a problem with prioritization. I have a problem with not being able to determine for one government or for one people or for one parliament or for one country to be able to determine its own priorities on where the money must be spent, what should be starved and what should be spent, right? Look, any country has a whole list of things that you want to do. Now, if you think that right now energy is the major sector which needs all the attention within the infrastructure, but somebody else thinks no, roads are more important or canals are more important, who should make that choice? The people of Pakistan as represented by their selected government. In this case, I don't want it to be, by selected, I mean properly selected. I mean, they are not the, so, and of course, through the representation in parliament and through the parliamentary system to actually work. So I don't have a problem with the NGOs playing their role, but for that, an agency within Pakistan should be able to determine it, as to that these are the projects that we want to implement through non-governmental organizations. There should be a way to sift out the dirt from the really good ones. And then there should be some agency which is looking at, okay, what is their tier? Is this tier 100 NGO or is this, so there is obviously a lot of literature which is also available that NGOs sprout up overnight, put up offices to be able to only get a certain type of assistance because they can do the office work, but the real people on the ground who are actually doing the work will not be able to have the fancy office and be able to do the intensive work that is required by the NGOs. In my experience in Muzaffargarh, I have seen that the real people who are actually doing non-governmental organizations, which are actually working on the ground, do not have the expertise to get these fancy donor projects because they will not be able to do the paperwork that is required. But those with just one office and a collection of cars will be able to do it because their entire aim is to get the donor money. NGOs sprout up just to get them. So I'm against those and very, very for those that actually work. And there are many which work, which have done wonderful work. In Pakistan, most of them are local NGOs, not foreign. Now, the last question that you asked was about aid reform policy. Look, an aid reform policy has to start with the first principle, that is the prioritization of spending of money will be done by the GOP, by the government of Pakistan, by the people of Pakistan. No Switzerland and Norway and US and UK and literally every 53 countries will tell us how to spend our money. How do you ever manage that? It is, having experienced that, I can tell you there is no way to manage that. And now that takes me, okay, so aid reform policy will start with that, with the prioritization has to be set by government. So government decides what projects need to be financed. Now, if you want to bring in your money, you are welcome to put it through one of those channels. If you are unable to, we are unable to appease you or appeal you with any of those channels, then please take your money somewhere else. Really, a strict, simple yes or no. Okay, and there is, of course, umpteen projects, whether you want to go project-wise or budgetary assistance-wise, that exist in every field that you can possibly imagine, whether it's water resource, whether it's health, whether it's education, whatever you want to do. There are umpteen options, okay? Now you want to import an option from Oslo, not happening. It should not be allowed to happen, okay? So that is one. And to say anyone who's coming with less than $10 million of projectized assistance, thank you, but the cost of really managing that assistance is far more than the $10 million you bring, okay? So put a threshold, say, okay, this much is required, this much and more will be, and all, whether it's bilateral or multilateral assistance, must go through the channels which are articulated here. And this ministry, as I said, an umbrella approach to go. Now, so this was the last question. And the third was, and the first question was donor influence governance structure. How does it impact negatively your governance structure? Look, what you have done is, or what you do is create a parallel governance structure, which each one of your people who are working in ministries have no incentive to work hard within the ministries, but have an incentive to latch on to a government donor-led project, which will pay them much more handsomely and will have much less accountability. Okay, these two things are there. I can assure you of that. Much less accountability, because many of those donor projects literally are standalone entities. You know, EAD would not know what's happening. The executing agency would have just have implanted one of their grade 1920 bureaucrat who is getting a healthy salary and driving a great Jeep, which they otherwise will not be able to do, and happily ensuring that the project never ends for the time that he's a bureaucrat. So this is a parallel governance structure. It keeps your own government structures from becoming empowered and from becoming efficient.
Fascinating. Look, I agree with you entirely that we've created a parallel government, and that is why I claim that we haven't got independence. But what worries me is that politicians hold APCs and do all kinds of things. We have seen your manifestos, and we have never seen your ideas. Now, not talking about you specifically, but about the politicians, that their ideas on aid. And I keep hearing this term, which is very disturbing to me as a Pakistani, very disturbing to me as a Pakistani, that CPEC is a game changer. I don't want some outsider to change my game. My father couldn't change my game. Why can't I change my own game? And here I relate this to our research has shown, madam, that not our research, sorry, the world has changed. In the last 40 years, there have been about 10 Nobel Prizes awarded. Another one is going to be awarded to say that we need to move on. Development is not projects. Development is institutions. Development is changing rules. Development is changing laws. Development is changing the way you work. Development is innovation, entrepreneurship. We are still stuck with what we call the Huck-Hag model. Huck as in Mahbubul Huck and Hag as in Harvard Advisory Group. They gave us this model where we think projects and we are still thinking projects. And the donors have taken over our policy work. They made NEPRA, they made CCP, they made SECP. We don't own those things. So my question to you, returning to this, is that somehow this question has to be handled. You also acknowledge that it is leadership. Now, when are our political leaders going to wake up to this reality, or are they just happy to go to the UNGA and make a speech and come back?
Okay, first of all, I would say that the business of trying to malign politicians is one that we all grew up in. It's an environment that we inherited that was taught to us, right? And it's great business, okay? Because those are, of course, the people who have really done the damage to the institutions and everything else to the country. I disagree with that, right? I believe that politicians have never really been able to have the rightful space. As someone who worked reasonably hard, if not very hard. I am very proud to say that I worked harder in my ministries than I have in my own business. Okay, I was, and as I said, in one of the ministries, I'm very happy with the results. In the other, I think I wasted a lot of hours that I could have spent having, doing something less. It wasn't boring, but so the thing is that I could not agree with you more that this projectized way of looking at development is actually something which keeps us away from really being able to achieve, to sort out the mess and enabler, right? You want government, you want country to have institutions which are all together. The institutions are enablers for growth. You can't make growth, you have to enable growth. And the growth has to come from the private sector. Now, if you look at the regulatory environment, that is not an enabler in the first place. So some of the policy work really needs to be done. But Nadeem, believe me when I say this, and I think you should be able to believe me because you worked in that environment. Do you realize how the Prime Minister and Cabinet is typically so, fed and completely dependent on the views of the Ministry of Finance? I'm not even going to say other ministries. Okay? So for me, the game changer is reform at the Ministry of Finance. Okay? Because they have all the, in some ways, responsibility or the power and none of the ability to be able to deliver on that. And what that does is that you have this, it's almost like the last days of the Raj, where you have an entity which is, supreme, etc., but has no power, no way to deliver that, what is expected of it. So, many a times I've been asked the question that, what do you think is one thing that you would do in Pakistan if you were ever to get a chance? And I say, well, it's not something that is going to sound very spicy and interesting. It's reform at the government processes. The way the business of running government, the PEPRA rules, for heaven's sake, those are archaic. They keep you from actually delivering on the projects. But yes, we will all happily sit in packs and, swear by them again and again and again. So reform needs to be done and this cannot be done by consultants. It can only be done within the ministry, because there are 50 to 50 ratio of really competent bureaucrats to really incompetent ones. But those 50% of the competent bureaucrats know what needs to be fixed. Okay? So reform at the governance level, at the government processes level, in the structural level, in how we do business, how government is able to implement any of its policy is what really needs it. And I could not agree with you more that all of these imported ideas which have been forced in Pakistan without having a lot of, again, which door do you knock? The Ministry of Finance. Guess who agreed to SCCP reform? Guess who agreed to NEPRA and unbundling and all of this? And you know how long it's been since this unbundling misnomer has been going on? 20 years. And have you achieved a better regulatory regime? Have you achieved a better energy? I would argue no. We are light years behind rather than ahead. So, but government processes is what we really need to look at.
Fair point. Very good. You'll be know that we are having PEPRA discussion tomorrow with Waqar Masood Khan, who's going to tell us about PEPRA. And I don't think there could be any better person to tell us about PEPRA than him, but we'll take that up tomorrow. In closing, let me just quickly raise this with you and you can react to it as you like. I was just thinking of 2 or 3 things that I've read in this connection. One was Masouda Bano, who gave us a lovely talk. She's from Oxford. She's written a book on aid, and a very good book. And she gave us this talk and she said, one of the problems with aid, and that kind of agrees with your thesis too, is that the money flow itself kind of distorts the incentives of social entrepreneurship. So good NGO would just be so attracted by that money flow and by the log form, the matrices, etc., that are given to it, that it loses its own purpose. So that's one thing. The other book that I want to quote to you is Dambisi Moyo. She's a Senegalese economist who wrote a book about, I think 8 or 9 years ago, maybe 10 years ago. It's called Dead Aid. And she talked about Africa. And she said that what happens is that the African leadership is beginning to look toward the donors as a constituency and not to their own people as a constituency. Therefore, it's kind of broken democracy in Africa. And then the final book that I'd like to quote to you is Tim Harford, who wrote a book called Messy. And he says that everything that human endeavor requires, whether it's innovation, entrepreneurship, development, or whatever, requires your own mess. You can't live on somebody else's outline. If I want to play tennis, I can't just pick up a book and learn tennis without making my own mess. So I have to make my own mess. I can get ideas from wherever I can. The question is that here, unfortunately, the donors say we can't make our own mess. They'll give us best practice. And we have kind of lost agency in our parliament, and we've kind of lost agency in our NGOs. So I go back to this, your last thoughts on where do we begin to mend it? You talked a lot about the MOF, etc. But let's go forward. I look to you, the reason I raise this question is you still have a future, unlike me who's gone. You still have a future. You will inshallah be back sometime or the other in a position of responsibility. How would you approach this issue again? How do we seed some power for us? How do you get some power back and be able to influence our own destiny, make our own reform, make our own change? Right now, we are still living with a colonial system, bureaucracy, everything is colonial. And the donors came in as an outside agency, and I don't know how we are figuring it out.
Yeah, I think it's less about, to answer your question very clearly and very easily, it's less about, how does the question of how do we take it back come when you decide not to give it in the first place?
Right.
Interesting question, right? Do not give it in the first place is my answer to your question. And, to basically say that exactly what I said in the last, so I don't want to repeat myself. The issue is that the rules of business that basically lead how any government agency works. By government agency, I mean their ministries, how policy is made, etc. The PEPRA rules that govern how a project is implemented in this country, the way we make important policy and how it is donor-fed. Now, those government processes, Nadeem, is what needs to change. Okay, you know this in Planning Commission. From the time that the project is conceived to the time that the first brick is laid, if I were to talk about projectized assistance or projects in so many words, 5 years would lapse. The need for that project doesn't even exist in 5 years, maybe, right? And then another 50 years will elapse before that project is completed. By that time, things would have moved light years ahead, right? So government processes right now are exceptionally archaic. So that's why I say anyone who is serious about reform will first look at the rules of, the rules of business, of how government can procure, how government makes policy, who makes government policy, which ministries interact, as in how. So we have the ECC, which is great. We have ECNIC, but ECNIC, you know that. I mean, what really happens in ECNIC is ECNIC really a body which has a final say on project approval? I will argue no. I will argue it's just a rudimentary, it's just a, a body where projects which are already pre-selected go and you just look for a signed signature. You just look for a vote of approval without really having any concrete discussion. Yes, ECC slightly more. So, this is not rocket science. There are governance structures all over the world. You can look at structures that work, even in our neighborhood sometimes a bit further away, and adopt. The fact that we still stuck with PEPRA rules says a lot, right? The fact that we still sped with Ministry of Finance, breathing down the throat of implementing agencies to take on loans with conditionalities that they do not agree with, says volumes of what is wrong, right? And believe me, Nadeem, it almost makes me want to spend little or no time in even arguing or discussing these things. I come back to Parliament after 5 years, and guess what I find in every committee meeting, and especially the Standing Committee on Finance? Nothing has changed. The problems remain the same. The solutions that are presented about the problems remain the same. The people who are presenting those solutions remain the same, or largely the same. And nothing else has changed. And the fate of the people of Pakistan, I guess, also remains the same.
Very good. Thank you very much. I think this has been a very informative discussion. You've been very candid. I appreciate that. Well, you've always been candid, even in office, I remember. In cabinet, you were very candid. In parliament, you were very candid. So inshallah, we look forward to young politicians like yourself make your mark again. Ladies and gentlemen, I think you've seen this, especially our students. We need much more work from you. You have to help our parliamentarians. No use just blaming them. We have to have much more research on these subjects. We have to have many theses and papers written on aid and all the things, the rules of business and the rules of parliament, monitoring these committees, everything. That's your job. If we start doing our job, each of us start doing our jobs where we sit. Students do the right theses. We do the right papers. We inform the people well. We inform our politicians well, we make this society. If we cede the space to the donor, that is wrong. We must have our own research, no matter how little it is, we must begin to do it. With that, I thank you, Hina Rabbani Khar. I thank everybody for participating. We look forward to hearing about the PEPRA rules tomorrow. Thank you, Hina. We'll trouble you again on some of the topics soon. All the best. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.